Imagine this. One night, life tips in your favor. A small investment you barely watched suddenly explodes. A side project you built out of boredom turns into a money-printing machine. Or a relative you hardly knew leaves behind an inheritance so absurd it feels like a cosmic glitch. It feels divine, doesn't it? Like the universe finally acknowledged your hidden worth. But Machiavelli warned long ago, fortune is a woman. She favors the bold, yes, but she abandons the unprepared. And what feels like a blessing can quietly turn into an execution. Because sudden wealth, like sudden power, doesn't transform who you are. It exposes you. It amplifies everything you already were, your patterns, your impulses, your illusions. You think you've gained freedom. What you've really gained is gravity. And that gravity pulls everyone around you into orbit. Friends, family, strangers, all subtly recalibrating themselves around your new center of mass. They'll call it support. They'll call it pride. But beneath that language of admiration lies hunger, the human instinct to move closer to whoever controls the resources of the tribe. You might think the scenario is rare. It isn't. Statistically, among thousands watching a video like this, some of you already hold winning lottery tickets, early equity in startups that exploded, crypto coins that multiplied beyond reason, and a few more will join you. That's not prophecy, that's math. Fortune occasionally visits the unexpected, and when she does, she tests more than your bank balance. Because here's the darker pattern. Those who stumble into wealth rarely keep it. Study after study of lottery winners, viral entrepreneurs, and instant millionaires reveals the same paradox. The faster they rise, the faster they fall. More than half end up bankrupt, addicted, or divorced within a few short years. They lose peace long before they lose money. Why? Because they confuse wealth with wisdom. They mistake winning for understanding. Machiavelli saw this centuries ago. He wrote about princes who inherited kingdoms. They didn't build rulers who mistook inherited power for earned authority. He said they maintain their thrones only as long as fortune favors them, and collapse the moment she turns her gaze elsewhere. The same truth applies now. If you didn't cultivate the discipline that creates wealth, the wealth itself will erode faster than you can spend it. Because money amplifies behavior. If you were disciplined, it multiplies structure. If you were impulsive, it multiplies chaos. So, before you celebrate, pause. Understand this. Your greatest advantage is silence. The world will beg you to announce your success, to post it, flaunt it, wear it. But every declaration invites conquest. Every victory shouted becomes a target painted on your back. The wise learn stealth wealth, the art of appearing ordinary while owning everything. The people who live quietly, modestly, but whose influence seeps into every corner of the room. They are the ghosts who move markets while standing in grocery store lines. History has always rewarded those who mastered invisibility. Take Cesare Borgia, Machiavelli's favorite study. He rose through charisma, charm, and a ruthless sense of timing. Yet even he learned that visibility breeds enemies. Admiration fades, envy multiplies. The more fortune you display, the more betrayal you attract. And centuries later, that same lesson repeated not in royal courts, but in suburbia. In 2002, Jack Whittaker won $315 million in a Powerball draw. Overnight, he became a national celebrity, cameras flashing, crowds cheering, strangers hugging him in grocery stores. He handed out cash to anyone who asked. He funded churches, bought homes for friends, tipped waitresses with stacks of hundreds. He believed generosity would shield him from jealousy. But when the applause faded, the wolves arrived. His marriage collapsed, his friends disappeared, his granddaughter drowned in luxury and addiction. Years later, hollowed out by loss, he said, "I wish I'd torn up that ticket." That sentence could have been lifted straight from the prince. Because Machiavelli understood this universal law. Power unguarded becomes prey. Wealth unguarded becomes curse. And the moment you expose abundance, you expose vulnerability. So, if fortune hands you gold, act as though she hasn't. Not because humility is noble, but because secrecy is survival. In a world obsessed with visibility, anonymity is the last armor. You might believe you can outsmart this truth, that you can manage the attention, filter the requests, curate the narrative. But Machiavelli would remind you that men are fickle and envy is predictable. The moment people sense you've gained something they haven't, they start unconsciously measuring themselves against you. And comparison is poison. It breeds resentment faster than greed. They may smile, they may toast you, but behind their congratulations, a small voice whispers, "Why not me?" That voice never stays small. So the question becomes, how do you protect yourself in a world that worships exposure? How do you live unseen while still moving boldly toward greater power? The answer isn't just silence, it's architecture. Because privacy isn't only about what you say, it's about what you build. And that leads us into the most overlooked principle of modern wealth: concealment through structure. Machiavelli advised rulers to build fortresses not of stone, but of strategy. In your case, that fortress is legal, digital, and psychological. Even if you tell no one, people sense change. They smell fortune the way wolves smell blood through subtle cues. Your habits, your tone, your posture. The world trains you to display success. Machiavelli trains you to disguise it. When sudden wealth arrives, the first person you should tell isn't a friend or relative, it's an attorney. Someone fluent in the language of trusts, foundations, and tax shields. Because true wealth isn't owned, it's structured. Ownership creates vulnerability. Structure creates protection. Machiavelli once wrote that a prince should rule through intermediaries, not to appear distant, but to remain untouchable. In the same way, your assets should flow through layers that conceal their source. A trust that holds your name in silence. A holding company that masks your interests. Professionals who manage your affairs quietly, while your public life remains unchanged. Discretion isn't paranoia. It's strategy. It's how dynasties survive while empires collapse. Jack Whittaker shouted his fortune and died broken. The Rothschilds whispered theirs and remained immortal. Even as they financed kings and wars, their public faces were modest, reserved, even dull. They let influence speak louder than display. That's stealth wealth, the aristocracy of silence. Because in the age of exposure, the invisible man is king. Once you've built silence around your wealth, you face the second storm motion. Because stillness feels unnatural after a windfall. Every instinct in your body screams, do something. You refresh portfolio apps, plan trips, browse properties, call advisors, anything to validate that you're in control. But motion is not mastery. In fact, most people lose their fortune, not through spending, but through fidgeting. They treat wealth like a fever, something to burn off through activity. Machiavelli would tell you, never confuse movement with strategy. A prince who rushes to act before he understands his new position becomes a servant to momentum, not its master. The wise ruler studies his territory before making a single decree. Likewise, the newly wealthy must study their new reality before altering it. There's a strange psychological distortion that happens after sudden success. Your perception of time collapses. You start to measure life in months instead of decades. That's because your brain equates volatility with opportunity. It feels like you must keep up with your luck before it fades. But fortune doesn't fade, discipline does. The richest man isn't the one who makes the boldest move, but the one who learns to wait. So instead of reacting, observe. Spend months, not days, understanding your new world. Watch how people behave around you. Notice who begins to orbit you differently. Wealth doesn't just change your lifestyle, it rearranges your ecosystem. Some will approach you for partnership, others for rescue. Some will praise your success as a way to test its boundaries. In their eyes, you'll see your new position reflected back, not as who you are, but as what you've become to them. Money is a mirror. Look closely, and you'll learn more about human nature in 1 year of wealth than in 10 years of poverty. And among those mirrors, the most dangerous reflection comes from family. Not because they wish you harm, but because they believe they're exempt from your boundaries. They'll tell you they just need a little help. They'll call it a loan, not a gift. But Machiavelli warned, there is nothing so delicate as managing the affections of those you love while holding power over them. Because the moment you say yes, the relationship shifts. You become their benefactor, not their equal. And when they fail to repay, as most will, resentment festers on both sides. Never lend money to friends or family. If you wish to help, give what you can afford to lose without expectation. But never mix emotion with obligation. Love is sacred until it touches money. Then it becomes arithmetic. In the Renaissance courts, princes faced a similar problem. Every cousin, courtier, and ally came asking for favors, titles, land, gold. The ruler who said yes too easily bred dependence. The one who said no too harshly bred rebellion. The art, Machiavelli said, lies in keeping everyone hoping, but few receiving. Modern wealth demands the same tact. Promise access to your wisdom, not your wallet. Because when you fund every problem, you teach those around you that your fortune exists to soften their failures. That isn't generosity, it's corruption disguised as kindness. But even after you build silence, structure, and distance, there remains one final battle, the war inside your own mind. Sudden fortune creates an identity crisis. You no longer fit inside the life that shaped you. Old routines lose meaning. Ambitions dissolve faster than you expect. You've climbed the mountain, and for the first time, there's no higher ground to aim for. That's where most collapse. Because, without struggle, the human spirit decays. Machiavelli understood this paradox. He wrote that a prince at peace must invent challenges to preserve virtue. If no enemies threaten his gates, he must simulate danger through reforms, through conquests, through discipline. Otherwise, softness seeps in and decay follows. For the modern millionaire, the same rule applies. You must turn fortune into purpose before it turns you into dust. This is why so many who retire early end up restless, paranoid, or addicted. They were trained for ascent, not stability. They don't know how to exist without striving. So they chase the illusion of movement, endless projects, impulsive ventures, reckless spending, anything to feel alive again. But aliveness isn't movement, it's alignment. The goal is not to spend your fortune, but to build through it. To convert money into structure, structure into meaning, and meaning into calm. That's the real victory. Not luxury leverage. Leverage over your time, over your emotions, over the need to perform for others. And this brings us to the quietest form of power, restraint. Anyone can acquire wealth. Few can absorb it without drowning. Restraint is the art of knowing that having the ability to buy something does not mean you should. In fact, the more you can afford, the fewer things deserve your attention. Every purchase becomes a declaration of values. Spend not to signal status, but to reinforce identity. A handmade watch that reminds you of discipline is wealth. A diamond one that reminds others of envy is vanity. Machiavelli taught that appearances should serve power, not replace it. So, choose symbols that strengthen you, not ones that weaken your perception of yourself. The final illusion to destroy is the idea that wealth brings peace. It doesn't. Peace comes only from structure, from knowing that your fortune can sustain itself without consuming you. That's why the ancient elites built dynasties instead of mansions. They thought in centuries, not seasons. They saw wealth not as ownership, but as governance, something to manage with foresight, discipline, and detachment. The Renaissance families understood this. The Medici, the Fuggers, the merchant princes of Venice. They weren't just rich, they were architects of continuity. Their true art wasn't banking, but psychology, the ability to preserve ambition across generations without letting it devour itself. They learned to treat fortune not as a feast, but as a kingdom, one that demands rule, not indulgence, because the truth is simple and brutal. You don't own sudden wealth. You inherit a problem disguised as a miracle. And unless you learn to govern it, it will govern you. Once you understand that wealth is not liberation but governance, everything begins to shift. You stop asking, "What can I buy?" and start asking, "What can I build that outlives me?" This is the point where the rich either evolve into stewards or collapse back into consumers. The key difference lies in perspective. To the untrained mind, wealth is a possession. To the trained one, it's infrastructure. Every dollar becomes a soldier, every asset a fortress, every habit a law of your private kingdom. That is not metaphor, it's psychology. In behavioral economics, there's a bias called the endowment effect. It means people overvalue what they already own simply because it's theirs. That's why new millionaires cling to the idea that their wealth is special, that their luck is deserved, that their portfolio will somehow defy gravity. But the universe doesn't play favorites. What it gives easily, it tests violently. The endowment effect blinds rulers and investors alike. You fall in love with your fortune, and love is the first crack in control. That's why the true elite, those who stay rich for generations, treat wealth as something impersonal. They depersonalize fortune. They build systems, not shrines. You can see it in how they talk. They never say, "my money." They say, "the fund, the trust, the structure." They understand the same principle that Machiavelli taught princes. Power is safest when it passes through layers of abstraction, when it's insulated from emotion. So if you've reached sudden wealth, this is the moment to think like a strategist, not a spender. Forget the fantasy of control. Build the machinery of endurance. Your empire needs rules, not excitement. It needs balance, because the markets, like human hearts, are fickle. And fortune, as ever, is a woman devoted today, indifferent tomorrow. Start with your stronghold, the capital itself. In finance, this is called preserving the principal. In philosophy, it's called restraint. Never consume the source of your freedom. Live from the yield, never the core. When you touch the principle, you are digging up the roots to taste the fruit. You may feel fed for a moment, but the tree dies slowly beneath your feet. History is filled with men who learned this too late. Athletes who earned hundreds of millions only to die in debt. Entertainers who mistook applause for immortality. Families who won lotteries and ended up selling furniture to pay property tax. Every story follows the same arc. They burned the kingdom to feel warmth. The disciplined rich do the opposite. They treat their fortune like farmland, something to harvest without destroying the soil. They plant crops that yield again and again. Businesses, dividends, rents, royalties, investments that breathe. It's the difference between eating a meal and owning the field. But this isn't just about math. It's about neuroscience. Your brain is wired for short-term dopamine, not long-term stability. When you buy something new, your limbic system lights up like fireworks. When you save or invest, it stays quiet. That's why self-destruction feels exciting and self-preservation feels boring. Yet boredom is the real sign of mastery. Machiavelli would call it the discipline of stillness. The modern mind calls it delayed gratification. Both describe the same truth. Your capacity to endure boredom determines your capacity to sustain power. So build your financial fortress the same way a ruler builds a city layer by layer, with redundancy, with humility. Diversify not because someone told you to, but because unpredictability is the only certainty left. Stocks, real estate, bonds, liquidity, all of it is less about return and more about resilience. In chaos, survival is success. You'll notice something peculiar as you do this. Your relationship with risk changes. You stop chasing thrill and start craving stability. You begin to see that wealth isn't about accumulation, it's about insulation. Each asset becomes not a status symbol, but a shield against randomness. The goal isn't to beat the market. The goal is to build a system that doesn't collapse when the market forgets your name. But even structure can turn into vanity if you let ego seep in. Many build empires not for safety, but for spectacle. They want their names etched into foundations, their initials on towers. But Machiavelli warned, the moment power seeks visibility, it surrenders its edge. The most dangerous wealth is the kind the world can see, because visibility breeds envy, and envy breeds schemes. Look at the Rothschilds, the family that quietly financed empires and wars, yet lived in near anonymity. Their real power wasn't in what they displayed, but what they concealed. That's stealth wealth, the art of owning everything while appearing to own nothing. It's not paranoia, it's self-defense. For in the modern world, privacy is the last remaining form of security. And here's the paradox. The more invisible you become, the freer you are. No one can attack what they can't perceive. No one can resent what they don't know exists. That's why true wealth doesn't scream, it whispers. It doesn't broadcast, it breathes. To live that way is not cowardice. It's strategy. You don't hide because you fear being seen. You hide because you understand that power dissipates in exposure. The sun blinds only because it burns from a distance. Stay too close to admiration, and you'll be consumed by it. And yet, silence doesn't mean stagnation. As Machiavelli wrote, idleness makes men soft. So keep working, but for yourself, not applause. Work not to survive, but to sharpen. Every act of creation reinforces the discipline that wealth threatens to erode. Because the danger of fortune isn't laziness, it's comfort. And comfort, over time, becomes decay. That's the secret no one tells you about getting rich. It's not about the money. It's about who you must become to handle it without falling apart. The fortune is not the end of the journey. It's the beginning of a far harder test. And the ones who pass are those who realize that the real currency isn't cash, it's composure. Because when fortune arrives suddenly, it doesn't bless you. It audits you. If fortune is an audit, then the next question becomes, what do you build after you pass the test? How do you move from being a lucky recipient to a conscious ruler of your domain? This is where wealth transforms from mere possession into philosophy. Machiavelli said that fortune governs half of human affairs, and the other half lies within our control. The average man wastes his half trying to bargain with fate, checking markets, chasing trends, reacting to noise. The wise man builds the half he controls into a fortress, so that even when fortune turns her face, he remains unshaken. That fortress, today, is your structure of assets, not just diversified for profit, but engineered for survival. Imagine your fortune as a kingdom with 5 provinces. The first is your army, the productive core of your wealth, such as broad-based equities or businesses that compound over time. They are your soldiers, loyal to growth, trained to expand your borders. The second province is your diplomacy bonds, fixed income, stable instruments. They move slower, but they negotiate peace when your army is exhausted. The third is your land tangible assets, like real estate or intellectual property, the soil from which new income grows. The fourth province is your scouts, the high-risk, high-reward bets like startups or crypto, limited in number, but useful for exploring new frontiers. And finally, your treasury cash or near-cash reserves, the quiet strength that allows you to buy opportunity when others panic. When structured properly, these 5 provinces protect each other. Growth feeds security, liquidity feeds opportunity. Each is a gear in the same machine. Neglect one, and the rest grind unevenly until the system collapses under its own imbalance. But diversification alone is not enough. Without discipline, structure becomes chaos in disguise. Even the most brilliant portfolio can rot from within if governed by emotion. This is where the Machiavellian principle of detached control becomes essential. Detach not from your goals, but from your impulses. Detach from greed when markets rise, from fear when they fall, from the need to outperform others just to reassure yourself that you're still relevant. Because every empire has fallen for the same reason the ruler began to believe he was the empire. When your identity fuses with your fortune, every fluctuation feels like a threat to your existence. That's the psychology of ruin. Neuroscience confirms this. The brain's amygdala, the center of fear, activates during financial volatility the same way it does during physical danger. The body cannot distinguish between losing $1,000 and facing a predator. That's why most investors self-destruct, not because of bad information, but because of their biology. Machiavelli didn't know neuroscience, but he knew men. He who cannot master his emotions will always serve them. So your greatest investment isn't in markets, it's in mastery of self. Meditation, solitude, journaling, reading, these aren't luxuries, they're maintenance rituals for sovereignty. Because the richer you become, the more your reality bends around your emotions. If you stay reactive, the world will manipulate you through flattery, fear, and urgency. If you remain still, the world bends toward you. At some point, if you've built correctly, money stops being the goal. You'll find yourself surrounded by abundance, but haunted by the same question that has stalked every powerful man since Rome. What now? This is the moment where philosophy replaces finance. Because once your fortress stands, you'll realize that fortune, without purpose, feels like exile. You can have everything and feel empty because you no longer know what to strive for. The struggle for survival once gave meaning to your days. Now, you must invent meaning from within. And that is a harder battle than any war fought for wealth. Legacy begins here, not as a monument to ego, but as the act of translating fortune into something that transcends it. Invest in ideas, people, and causes that sharpen the mind or uplift the world. Use your influence to create stability, not spectacle. Because the ultimate expression of wealth is not control, it's continuity. This is why the Medici were never merely bankers. They were patrons of art, science, and human progress. They funded Michelangelo, Galileo, Botticelli, not out of vanity, but out of strategy. They understood that culture, not currency, is what immortalizes a dynasty. Money built their walls, meaning filled their halls. That's the blueprint. Once your needs are met, spend not to impress, but to evolve. True freedom isn't waking up with nothing to do. It's waking up with nothing you have to do, but something you choose to. The purpose of money is not escape. It's precision, the ability to focus entirely on what matters. When used wisely, wealth doesn't isolate you from the world. It connects you to it at a higher level of participation. It becomes a mirror, reflecting your deepest philosophy, your personal ethics rendered in currency. And so, in the end, all of Machiavelli's lessons converge into one paradoxical truth. Fortune tests us not by what it gives, but by what it reveals. It doesn't transform the unprepared, it exposes them. Wealth doesn't change the game, it magnifies the stakes. And those who fail to rule themselves will always be ruled by what they own. So act, but act with foresight. Build, but build with patience. Own, but never let ownership define you. Because the true prince of our age wears no crown, carries no banner, and rules no subjects. He rules only himself quietly, completely, invisibly. And that is the only kind of power fortune cannot take away.